Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up of all the books that I finished since my last wrap-up way back in January. In February, I finished one book, and that was Afropean by Johny, and I already spoke a little bit about this book. I absolutely loved it. I thought it gave a really important extra dimension to the Black experience, which we commonly tend, I think, to associate with specifically the Black North American experience, and that's not everyone's experience. And I think because he goes to all these different countries in Europe that have all sorts of different histories with Black people, it manages to touch on quite a lot of different experiences and perspectives. And I think the way that he approaches the subject with lots of curiosity and open-mindedness is great for us also coming into that space, not knowing necessarily all the unique little historical bits that have sort of shaped each country's relationship to Black people. I really wanted to do a full review of this book, and at this point I'm not sure that I'm going to manage to fit that in anytime soon, but it's also a book that I want to reread, so if I don't get around to doing a proper full review for it soonish, then it'll be coming. In March, I read 3 books, the first of which was On Anarchism by Noam Chomsky, and this one I had hoped would give a little bit more insight into the more practical parts of anarchism, or at least flesh out a little bit more of what anarchism is from an academic perspective, and it certainly did the latter part of that. This doesn't have a lot of like practical stuff in it. This isn't one that I would recommend to someone who is just coming to anarchism out of nowhere. But it's also one that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for someone who's looking to put elements of anarchism into practice in their everyday lives. It's not highly academic, but I think it skews more towards that side of things and can be a little dry, and I'm glad that I listened to it on audiobook because I think I probably would have got bored and put it down if I were reading the physical copy, even though it's a very slim volume. So I think if you are particularly interested in politics, then this is a great one to pick up just for your knowledge, but if you're more looking for the practical side of things, I feel like it's fine to give this one a miss. After that, I wasted my time on The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imamura. I mentioned this in a currently reading video, but this one just kind of felt pointless to me, and like it had weird pacing and the ending didn't match the beginning, and yeah, I came to the end a bit like, why did I even... I wouldn't recommend this to anyone. I don't know who I would recommend this to other than maybe people who just generally like the sense of like Japanese literature quirkiness, but I actually feel like if you want something like that, there are other books that I would probably recommend ahead of this, including, for all his problematicness, Haruki Murakami I think does the whole quirky writing thing quite well, and it's, I feel like, more entertaining and bizarrely like more cohesive than this ultimately ended up feeling to me. So I didn't particularly like this one, but it is a book from my physical TBR, so I am able to take that off now. Then I read Crying in Mart by Zauner, and I really loved this book, and I actually have some thoughts that I filmed, I think pretty immediately after I'd listened to the book, so I do plan on putting that together if it's coherent enough at some point, but I don't think it'll end up being a review so much as just notes. But I was a bit surprised when I finished this and saw other people's reviews that were much more lukewarm, whereas I quite liked it, and it seemed to me from reading the reviews that maybe my listening to it as an audiobook really helped with that reading experience being so positive. And also I didn't know anything about Zauner going into this at all. I knew like nothing really even about the book or like how her mother died or anything. Like I just literally knew it was a grief memoir. So perhaps that also helped my experience of it, having zero expectation at all. Even though I don't have a tiger mum and my experience with my mum is quite different from hers, there was still a lot of things that were very relatable. And I mentioned in my currently reading video that there is something that's quite powerful for me about reading grief memoirs and sort of getting a sense of a person's relationship to someone else, and I really enjoy those reading experiences for some reason, so maybe it's no surprise that I got on really well with this book. And finishing that book kicked off April's reading. So the next book that I read in April was The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Pretty shortly into starting this book, I immediately felt like I get on with James Baldwin's nonfiction a lot better than I did his fiction. That said, it might be a little early for me to say that because I've only read Giovanni's Room of his fiction, and I've only read one short essay collection, and it was a very short essay collection, but I really got on well with this. It felt like a historical text, but with commentary from someone who just had a very nuanced way with wording and also a nuanced understanding of the world. Whenever I come across any nonfiction or like quotes or anything like that from James Baldwin, often I am impressed by his compassion for those who are on the opposite side, I guess, of what he's fighting for, and also how resilient he is to not falling into traps of hatred, which I think is easy enough to happen for a lot of activists working in the civil rights space. And so far I feel that more so for James Baldwin than I do even for someone like Martin Luther King Jr., who I guess has kind of a monopoly in our minds often on the idea of like leading his practice with love. I feel like James Baldwin has an even stronger version of that in my head at least, and his willingness to reach across the other side without sort of sullying his values or without compromising things that are really important. That is something that I find impressive, and it makes me want to read more from him, and there's a lot in it that I actually find relatable in its own way. And I think partly, I imagine a lot of that is also coming from the fact that he is in a space of intersections that many Black men would not necessarily have been. So whereas many Black men are marginalized purely for their race, other people in spaces of intersections such as Black women will be facing issues of sexism and racism. And so even in the groups that they try to assist with, there are elements of their identity that are being suppressed by those groups that they are wanting to help. And I guess James Baldwin, being a gay Black man, sort of feels more in tune with what those intersections can kind of bring out, but not even so much to do with him being a gay Black man, because when I talk about the nuanced way of him like reaching across the table, I'm mostly talking about how he manages not to hate white people despite the time that he's living in and the kind of activists that surround him who are on the border of that. And I guess it's because he has had more mixed interaction with white people than maybe some of his peers had at the time. So anyway, that was a really interesting book for me to read, but very short, and it definitely made me interested in picking up more of his work, but I am skeptical that I will get on with his fiction as well as I do his nonfiction. The next book that I finished in April was Digital Minimalism by Newport. Yes, this one I started as an ebook, but I finished the audiobook from my library, and I really liked this one, and it surprised me because I kind of expected it to be sort of productivity bro bullshit, but it ended up being quite useful, I think. I can see definitely how people would interpret this as being sort of a more extreme approach to handling your technology, but it ended up being something that I feel like is very customizable, so you can make it as extreme or unextreme as you want. The only part that I think feels very jarring is the initial month that he suggests of having a tech detox, but it is not excluding necessary tech. So if you need your emails for work or whatever, then he's not saying to like don't answer your work emails, obviously. But I think what I value about it as well is that it is looking at not just taking tech out of your life, but filling those gaps that are inevitably going to be created by removing something with what I think he calls like high value hobbies. And I really like that. Like it makes a lot of sense, but I think that component is often missing from a lot of other works that talk about sort of detoxing the tech from your life. Like, you have all of these things of like dopamine detoxes and like social media detoxes and all of that stuff, but it's not really telling you what you would be filling that time with, other than like the sorrow of having missed your tech, you know. But there were a lot of things about this that I really appreciated, particularly how practical it was and how many examples there were of people approaching this in ways that suited them. So there were some people who, yeah, were like, I don't need Facebook at all, got rid of it completely. But there were others who came up with some really like creative solutions to use Facebook in a way that they needed it and was helpful for them, without falling into the trap of like doing all the Facebook things without kind of assessing whether or not they needed to, as just one example. And so it's really made me want to look again at how I'm using my social media, especially particularly things like Instagram, and not just for reasons of not wanting to be on my phone all the time, but also for reasons of like I just don't like a lot of these big tech companies. I don't trust them. I find a lot of what they do really unethical, and so I don't really want to feed into that more than absolutely necessary. And so because of what my job is as an illustrator, there is a component of social media that has been very useful for me for finding art directors who will employ me, and for connecting with other illustrators and stuff, because, you know, being a freelance illustrator is quite a lonely endeavor. Basically, you're largely just working in your house unless you have a studio somewhere, which can be expensive and kind of counterproductive. At least for me, I noticed that I just don't really like working from a studio. I much prefer working from my home studio. So yeah, social media is something that I'm trying to grapple with. How much of it do I actually need? And I think this book has given me some practical tools that I can reference to get a better handle on that aspect of things, and also with tech more broadly, but particularly that. After that, I finished Atomic Habits, which again is a book that I was pretty skeptical about going into, partly because again, I thought it was going to be sort of productivity bro nonsense, but it ended up actually being quite good. And I think I felt even more like that when I was listening to it in the car with my boyfriend, and he also really appreciated it. And there were loads of things that we were talking about to do with Atomic Habits and things that we might want to implement ourselves. And I think it's actually something that I do quite naturally anyway. But I think having more structure around that, like not having it just be something that I'm naturally sort of fumbling at, but having a clear, specific system and structure for how I go about implementing new habits is probably going to be kind of fun for me to play with, because I am a very optimize-y type of person, which is what makes it funny that I hate productivity bro nonsense. But yeah, I actually did enjoy this book. Then my hold on Thursday Murder Club came back up again, and I listened to that one. I liked a lot of it. Well, I feel like I liked half of it, and I was not that fussed about the other half of it, and not chronologically, really, more like in terms of content. So I loved the characters, I loved their interactions, I loved finding out more about them, I loved finding out more about their past lives when they were younger. I loved their little unique eccentricities. But the actual mysteries didn't really do much for me. They felt very contemporary in a way that felt a bit of a shame for me. So what I mean by that is this had a lot of potential to me for being a contemporary version of golden era mysteries, and it has that sort of charm, especially in the characters. But then the mystery feels very contemporary in that it feels like one of those things where there's not really clues along the way that you can figure out the mystery, or on a second reading you're like, oh, it was so obvious. It's more like, I don't know, how a contemporary mystery show might be, where just things become revealed later that you could never have guessed at. And that aspect of it I didn't really like that much. That's not the kind of mystery that I tend to like. I like a cozy golden era murder mystery kind of thing. It doesn't have to be murder, but yeah, I like cozy kind of mysteries, and this had the charm of that in terms of characters, but not so much in terms of plot for me. So I don't know, I might pick up the next one in the series, but I'm also not sure. I don't know if the characters alone are enough to carry me through the whole series, but I'll see. And then, because I liked Atomic Habits as much as I did, and it surprised me in the way that it did, I decided to pick up BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits. And this one I DNF'd at 37% of the way through because I think I just picked this up way too close to having just finished Atomic Habits like days before. But the reason I picked it up was because I'd heard that BJ Fogg was a mentor or inspiration or something like that for James Clear, who did Atomic Habits. I don't actually know if that's true or not. I didn't look into it. But because I had heard that, I thought it might be a good idea to kind of go to the source material and check out BJ Fogg's work. And I mean, I can believe that he was a mentor to James Clear because pretty much all of the stuff is the same, you know, or very, very similar. And I think I just got on with James Clear's authorial style a little bit better than BJ Fogg. Not to say that I didn't get on with BJ Fogg's style, just I already had something that worked for me in Atomic Habits, and so I think that I was just burnt out on this topic, and you know, I didn't need to continue reading it. So I wouldn't say that it's a bad book by any means, but if you're wondering which one to pick up, I'd say maybe like read the first chapter of each one, and whichever one you're getting on with better, continue that one, and then you don't need to read the other one. That's my opinion. And most recently I ended my April reading by finishing Your Happiness Was Hacked. Why Tech is Winning the Battle to Control Your Brain and How to Fight Back by Vivek Wadhwa and Alex Salkever. This was going fine until it wasn't for me. I think it was just okay ultimately, but it felt more like most of the book is looking at explaining to you all the various areas in which tech is making our lives worse. And they do try to explain like they're not anti-tech or anything like that, and they certainly aren't. And they are like from the tech world and stuff. So, you know, they're like, oh, there's all these great things, but here are a lot of negative things that come along with that. And I guess it's to explain to you why you need, like almost to prime you of like why you should maybe consider having a bit more distance with your tech. And I can especially see why they would take that route coming from the tech world, because I think you probably have to convince people in those spaces a lot more than you do maybe a lot of the general public who isn't like hooked into the matrix. But what I had a problem with in this book is that the solution that these guys have come up with kind of seems like, so what we need to do is give tech even more of our information, so that once they have more of our preferences that, you know, we don't want to be addicted to tech, then they will help us to not be addicted to the thing that they're selling to us. And I just felt like, I don't know what world he's living in where the drug dealers help the addicts to not be addicts anymore, but it just seemed absolutely fantastical that they could think that that was going to fit into any kind of solution. And they kind of begrudgingly are like, yeah, there are some situations where we feel like government intervention might be a thing, and it just felt very libertarian to me. And that's just not like as in US libertarian, not as Noam Chomsky would say is like the real meaning of libertarian, because there are differences there, and if you read on Anarchism you'll find out about those. But I don't know, I found their solutions to be just not fit for purpose. It didn't feel like after detailing all of these like huge issues that we have with tech, their solutions felt just not very realistic. It didn't feel like enough to me, and it didn't feel practical enough either in a book that's talking about like, you know, oh, here are all the ills of this thing, now if you go do something in response to that. Like, I think it's very helpful to have more practical ways of handling that, and that's something that I got from digital minimalism and not from this. So the and how to fight back part of this title, I feel like I don't want to say it's a lie, it's not there. But that was all of my reading for the last few months, and so now I guess this whole thing is going to be way longer than I would ever want a video to be, but I'm glad that you stuck in with me until this point if you have. And if you have stuck around until now, leave me a little robot emoji to let me know that I'm not alone right now. But that's all I have for now, and I think it's quite a lot. And hopefully next time will be a little sooner than this was. Bye.